pull for governments to run their state-owned enterprises. It could be done directly or indirectly. Directly, if government develop a balanced scorecard as the integral for the whole sector of state-owned enterprises, and one is indirectly when government foster and stimulate their large state-owned enterprises to develop balanced scorecard for their complex structure. And the common assessment framework model is useful for introduction to the employees of the performance management, which is marked of the key driver for the further improvement of state-owned enterprises, and it is another step to the conduction of total quality management system in public organization. And actually, this is one comparison between common assessment framework and the balanced scorecard model, which shows actually how its partnerships working. And if you consider the goals, for example, the goals of the balanced scorecard is improvement of strategic and financial performance and translating the organizational strategy into practical activities, communication and monitoring, while common assessment framework is more focused on some current situation, and it is a framework for the continuous improvement through the encouragement of the introduction of best practices and identification of strengths and areas for improvements. And actually, introduction and application of both of these performance management systems should result in one setup of the various indicators which could be used, both soft indicators and hard indicators, to the assessment of the improvements of the performance in the state-owned enterprises. Thank you for your attention.
I'd like to invite our last speaker to the stand, Ms. Levuli from South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, I think while he's preparing this, I should say that, Chair, in my language, there's a saying that says, "Mojamorago ke kgosi." It means he who eats last is king. We'll say queen in this instance, but in the interest of time, I will not take it literally for today. Okay. Yes. Just before I start, let me thank you for your invitation for South Africa to also contribute to the debate and discussions happening today. We really appreciate it. If you take a literal definition of an SOE, South Africa has over 500 SOE, state-owned enterprises, but the DPE is responsible for 9 of them, 2 of which are dominant players, monopoly service providers in ports, rail and pipeline, and in the electricity sector. The presentation that I will share with you today will focus on the methodology that we've developed as the DPE, and also share with you a case study of one of our enterprises, Transnet, which is in the transport sector. So the presentation will cover about 27 slides. I'll try and rush through them. Most of the issues here have been mentioned before in other presentations. But essentially, this is our understanding of what we want our SOE to play, the kind of space that we want them to occupy. We are saying that a core role of the SOE is to provide strategic network infrastructure to ensure security of supply and develop key industrial capabilities. In our view, particularly in the infrastructure sector, government is the only social agent that has an interest in ensuring that there is provision of infrastructure. In our case, it's important because there are issues of security of supply, and also, we need to have some security around the supply, either fuel supply, because we import most of our fuel supply, and also electricity supply, for instance. So government will continue to be a dominant player in that space. However, we're not saying there is no space for private sector to play a role in this space. In the instance of Transnet, we are considering the balance sheet constraints that the company faces, and we're saying that there is some space for private sector to play a role, either in the provision by way of public-private partnerships or concessions on sections of the rail network. So the other important issue that we are facing in South Africa, and which I think has been mentioned before here in this conference, is the issue of industrial development. We are saying we should leverage the state ownership of these enterprises to drive industrial development in our economy. So we are saying that infrastructure investment can create demand conditions for the development of industrial capabilities. So let's share some of what we're doing in terms of the management process. I'm not sure why the lady is blind, but essentially the key message here is that we're trying to balance the enterprise interest in that the enterprise needs to be commercially sustainable. At the same time, it needs to deliver on the national interest, the developmental objectives that we're talking about. So we recognize that there are three levels that we need to deal with: the shareholder responsibility, the board responsibility, and the management responsibility. So I'm saying there are very distinct responsibilities between these three layers. The shareholder responsibility, and in this instance, the Minister of Public Enterprises is the shareholder representative on behalf of the South African government, owns the shares, not the enterprise assets. And these shares give the shareholder specific rights and powers, as we'll see. He issues a strategic intent statement, appoints the board, and concludes a shareholder compact. And I'll show you just a bit of what it looks like in the instance of Transnet. And we're saying these responsibilities are very distinct from those of the board and the management. We are saying board and management is responsible for ensuring the financial sustainability of the company through coherent utilization of company assets. And they're also responsible for implementation of the strategic intent. They're also responsible for other management functions like the appointment of senior middleman management and other staff. But they're also responsible for managing all aspects of operations. We also recognize that in this space, there are policy and regulatory players. What is their role? Half the time we're finding that there is usually a conflict between what the SOE must deliver in terms of infrastructure and the return or the tariff that the SOE needs to charge to be able to provide that infrastructure. So we are saying that we need to have a balance between the regulatory objectives, enterprise interests, and the national interest. So one of the perspectives that we believe in is that funding must ultimately derive from a commercial tariff for the state-owned enterprise. We recognize the extent of investments that we need to make in South Africa go beyond the balance sheet of the state. And so we want to leverage the ability of state-owned enterprises to access capital markets to assist in the provision of the infrastructure so that it's not funded just from the fiscus. So government, the other part of it is that you need continuity in this sector. And government, state-owned enterprise is really your key to making sure that you have this continuity in the provision of infrastructure. But of course, we need to balance that between the needs of the consumers who at times cannot afford the high electricity charges or the port tariffs. And we also need to balance that with the private sector interest. How do we do this in practice? We've developed, we call it a framework. And essentially it follows step by step what we do. In the first place, we develop a strategic intent statement for the enterprise, which is really a primary tool to communicate the state's expectation from that enterprise. We do this via intergovernmental consultations. Like I said, we recognize that policy and regulatory players are key to also assisting government in achieving its objectives. From that strategic intent statement, we develop a shareholder compact, which is really an agreement between the shareholder, represented by the Minister of Public Enterprises and the board, as to what will be delivered on an annual basis. On the back of that, the company then develops its corporate plan and its corporate strategy to deliver on the strategic intent statement. Then, as a department, we undertake performance monitoring and evaluation. We have a dashboard that we use. We call it Isibuko dashboard. Isibuko really means a mirror. So we're trying to see as much as possible into what's happening in the SOE. But it happens on two levels. On the other side of the state-owned enterprise, where they capture the information, make the inputs, and on our side, where we do an assessment of their performance and provide some recommendations to the minister. I won't go through much of the slide. It's really, the kind of issues that we've got on the dashboard: financial, operational, socio-economic risks. This I will also not go through, except to say that we've got a comprehensive risk management framework. So we follow a very detailed step-by-step process in assessing the risks that an SOE faces, and that we also need to be aware of as a shareholder. Just by way of example, on Transnet, those are some of the SOE top 10 risks. And at the bottom, you see the rest that the department assesses. Obviously, you can see from there that the enterprise obviously has an interest in seeing the financial sustainability, and that comes very much, forward when they start sharing what they see as the risk. It's primarily around the financials, but for government, it goes beyond the financials. It has to be more on what are your public service obligations, are you achieving on the developmental objectives and the like. We have what we call a competitive supply development program. Through this, we're leveraging the significant infrastructure investments of Transnet and Eskom to develop a local supplier industry. In the case of Transnet, we're saying the procurement of about 45 billion rands in rail infrastructure should translate into a development of a local supplier industry in South Africa. This is really related to the previous slide. If I can just go back to explain just the diagram there. So we start off with a CSDP strategy, and really the point of the slide is that we need to drill it down to the point where it is captured in the processes, organizational processes, and it's part of what the staff management does in delivering to the CSDP objectives. This is really to say we do a board induction program where we try to really make the board understand what government is trying to achieve with the state-owned enterprise, and we let the board then drive down that message in the organization. A big focus in South Africa is around skills development. So this also really takes much of our effort in the performance monitoring and seeing how the state-owned enterprises deliver in the space. A case study on Transnet, I'll quickly go through this, Chair. This is the strategic mandate that was shared with the board at the annual general meeting this year. And we said Transnet's mandate is to assist in lowering the cost of doing business in South Africa, enabling economic growth and security of supply through providing appropriate ports, rail and pipeline infrastructure, as well as operations in a cost-effective and efficient manner within acceptable benchmark standards. At this stage, we are communicating a message to the enterprise, which they understand in their language. We need to then take this message back and translate this into how the enterprise, by delivering on the strategic intent, has made a difference in the South African economy. The 6 focus areas you can go through, except if I can just highlight 5. Early this year, the president commenced with an outcomes-based approach. He said by end of 2014, we need to see a certain outcome in the economy in which the SOEs participate. In the case of Transnet, it's outcome 6. We're saying that we need to see by 2014 a responsive economic infrastructure that meets the needs of our growing economy. This is just an example of the shareholder compact that we have at Transnet. This is at group level. I haven't put the operating division KPIs. Just to say, this is for the 2010-11 financial year. For 2011-12, we'd like to put in some public service KPIs to see how they're doing in that area. This is the investment program I was talking about, 90 billion over the next 5 years. It's actually increased to 103 billion rands. And it's really to meet the needs of the economy. So far, they've spent 72 billion rands over the past 5 years on CAPEX. The investment program, this is really where we start saying all those things that we've said to the SOE, how does it now translate the difference that it makes in the economy? So we conducted an economic impact study in which said that the 80 billion, and this was in 2008 when we did this, the 80 billion program would translate into over 500,000 jobs by Transnet by 2018. And the provinces that you see, that bar graph that you see there, is really the 9 provinces in South Africa, and you can see where the the significant impact is. Yeah. This is just the facilities that we have for training. We're trying to beef up on these facilities. There's about 29 of them spread out. So this is just Transnet facilities in ports, rail, pipelines, and engineering. This just shares the CSDP transaction that we've embarked on. This is the transaction I was talking about, the procurement of locomotives from General Electric, and how that will be used to develop a local supplier industry. BEE we're really saying here that the enterprises need to be at the forefront of correcting the imbalances that we've experienced in our country. And part of the BBBE, which is broad-based black economic empowerment, is really saying the SOE must drive preferential procurement from black enterprises. And as we see, that is just a trend from 2007 to 2010, how the spending has gone. And that's the end of my presentation.
And now it's the opportunity for our discussants to contribute towards the proceedings. I've been asked to be quite brutal on our discussants, and I apologise for that. But to make some progress, perhaps our first one is Dr. Mumba Kapumpa. If you would come forward, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sitting from there, it appears the sound boxes are facing that way, so we're actually having difficulties to pick out. So if I make comments and they sound like when I'm referring to Michael, I'm really referring to Mr. Alexander, you forgive me. But I'll make very few comments because even the time has been slashed from 10 to 5 in the interest of lunch. First of all, I enjoyed listening to the speakers. I just picked more or less like one sentence from each of the speakers to put together my thoughts. From Michael, emphasizing on the need to monitor strategy, I thought he said at some point, you must have the KPIs right. The key performance indicators must be right for you to be able to do any monitoring. When John Samuel came on, he said, yes, have your KPIs okay, but there must be political will. And from what we have heard yesterday and today, insofar as Kerala is concerned, there is a lot of political will. And I'll make some comments later in the afternoon when I make my own presentation. So political will becomes very, very critical. Padma, my friend there, raised the issue of budgets for SOEs. And this is really linked up to the performance because indeed, if the budget is not properly crafted, prepared, and then followed, it becomes almost impossible to do any monitoring. Ricebe Lepule, now because she's my neighbor, so there are quite a few things that I was able to figure out what she was saying. One of the most important documents, and I'll be talking about it myself later this afternoon, this is the shareholder compact. This is an agreement between the shareholders, that is the government, and the board of directors, in which it describes what exactly the government expects the particular organization, the particular SOE to deliver. And it is on the basis of that shareholder compact or shareholder performance agreement, it's on that basis that you are able to determine any monitoring if you have to be able to do it. In other words, at the end of the day, the message I seem to have got from the colleagues who spoke is that, first of all, there has to be a very close relationship between the shareholder, that is the government, and the SOE. The government should not set up an SOE and then go back to sleep. It must have that willpower in the first place to set it up, and in the second place, to drive it, in the third place, to monitor it. And monitoring should not just simply be, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. That's just like ticking in a notebook. It is to sit down and then determine where things didn't go right, and then how to improve. Because at the end of the day, as I think one of the colleagues mentioned there, you must go beyond the balance sheet. You must ensure that, in fact, you translate that budget into development in the nation. There's no point of having SOEs if, in fact, people still continue having difficulties to access the services that the particular institution provides. My last comment, Chair, is that Raisibe introduced a term which is applicable specifically to South Africa. This is the BEE. This is the Black Economic Empowerment Program, which was introduced when the majority government came into power, knowing that for years the system of apartheid never allowed the black person, whether it's Indian or African, to participate in the economic well-being of the country. So there was a deliberate program to ensure that those who are left behind should be brought up. Now, you may not want to have a BE in Kerala, but certainly you may want to have a program that ensures that those communities within the state of Kerala who are not able to access the services that are provided should be given that just little extra mark to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Minister, distinguished guest and panelists. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be, in fact, invited to this conference by the Honorable Minister. I was for 2.5 years part of the team led by Honorable Minister, both as Secretary Industries as well as Chairman of some of the SOEs and CEO of 2 of the SOEs for 2.5 years. So I was part of the monitoring team along with the minister, and I was also being monitored. That 2.5 years experience, with that, I heard a lot of speakers. I had that good fortune of now attending for 2 days and hearing this speakers from economists, from trade union leaders, from international experts. It was a great experience for me. With that experience, I only just want to make in this 5 minutes 2 points. One is that whatever is the philosophy behind starting of SOEs, when there was a government where as a minister who acted like a group company chairman and started monitoring the SOEs with the intent of profit. this resurgence has happened. This is what my experience is. I was also part of the same department in the previous government. I was also CEO of companies as well as Secretary of Industries in the previous government. So the only difference, the truth of the fact is that when profit making by companies, reducing losses initially and then converting later into profit, was taken as one of the main principles on which companies got monitored. All other aspects are subsets of that particular objective. When that was done, the good number of SOEs in the state, got into profit, and what we now claim as a resurgence has happened. So whatever may be the philosophy, the truth remains is this. Arithmetics, accountings won't change whether it is in socialist or capitalist system. So if profit is not there, companies' assets comes down, depreciation happens, either the government put in that money to keep them going or they perish. There is no other, that's a truth. That's the truth. So when a minister realized this, backed by the political will to do so. So like Mr. Balakrishnan said, these companies were in the ICU. So ICU were to be given support. That support was given by the political government of the day in terms of settling their loans through OTS. We ran to banks and then settled OTS, cleaned up their balance sheet. Like Padma Kumar said, audit delays for 10 years were cleaned up by taking help from the CAG. A lot of such effort I do remember for 2.5 years, which continued, and I could now come part of the day to celebrate those. Resurgence was a great delight for me. The second point I want to say is that this 5 years of intensive work of transforming this organization, I believe that has been imbibed by the organization themselves by now. If they have taken that thing, they have nothing to worry. If those principles which we did continue to actually operate after coming years, they have nothing to worry. They have every chance of survival and growth. There is no doubt regarding that. The rehab was there for 10 years or 15 years, and rehab will be there. And the monitoring system developed by them will not simply go away. And if the organization has really imbibed this, and the practices in the organization has actually established, and they can continue with that thing. So I don't see there is any threat or any problem for the SOEs in Kerala to further nurture and grow, irrespective of the political formation. Like Mr. Balakrishnan said, Kerala, I am a Keralite. I lived there for years together. I've seen the growth of PSUs, the coming down, and then they're again, resurgent and coming up. There is a tremendous support from the public from Kerala on this thing. They love PSUs, and nobody in the public generally demands that throw them to hell. They want them to grow. So that support will be always there, and if the organizations continue to do this, it will happen. So this monitoring, what we did is, like every aspect of them was monitored. I think Padma Kumar has not explained it, lack of time. Every aspect of it was monitored, and a system is established. I think we did a lot of things in reducing, I would say reducing corruption by monthly monitoring. We saw what was happening, every purchase, every sale, everything was being monitored. So that was when there is a will, it is possible. A SOE can be run like a private organization. That is what the Kerala government did with the leadership of the Honorable Minister has shown, and I hope it will continue to be so. With that, I thank you.
A very good afternoon to all. Chairman, please remind me when I have 1 minute left. I am a Vice Chancellor, so why I am here, probably I need to explain a little bit on that, even the short duration of time. I used to work for a very well-managed public institution in right in Trivandrum for 10 years. Then I went to US, but worked there for a public funded institution, university for some time. Then I started managing somebody else's money. And after some time, I started managing my own money a little bit. And came back as the Vice Chancellor of a local university to manage the public money again, SOE. So my opinions are based on this experience. Coming straight to, I apologize if I don't stick to the main theme of this session as such, but overall I would find the common thread of all the speakers is everybody is suggesting following good governing and good management practices, whatever you do. And in different scenarios, they have had experience in using good practices all over the place. And it gave good results also. In our case also, in the particular situation in Kerala, SOE, I think the main content, main theme was they also, even though they don't say, probably they don't say, they use the corporate practices in their, even in their day-to-day affairs. But the common thread I would see in this success scenario is they have covered a different set of industries, and if you say we have a GDP of 8% or 9% for the last few years, still these type of different set of industries cannot survive in that GDP, that growth phase. So there is something beyond that growth aspect which was successful here and which need to be cloned, need to be understood and practiced elsewhere. Probably first thing is a good leadership with the minister as a, I don't say it, probably it is, I don't know, but as a good leader and implementing good management practices in his system. And participatory management, as I understand little more last 2 days, participatory management in all the activities, right from his office down to the companies he governed. And he transformed the IAS administration. He added IMS also probably, management also in the IAS wording, he added management also probably. Probably that is my take on the whole thing. So that was the clear reason for me for this success in Kerala. And coming to the performance evaluation, one of my points I would add to what they have already deliberated here is performance monitoring is for the future. So what we are doing here today will, at the highest level, we should be discussing what we'll be doing in 5 years or 10 years from now. And that incorporates good R&D. And of course, good R&D means good documentation. The importance of documentation is very evident. I have worked with the FDA in USA, and probably that is the most toughest regulatory environment, and there requires very tight documentation even for innovative research. And I have done sitting with a small business in US, my activity was, I used a software from India, I used a manufacturing in China, I used assembly in Mexico, my product was distributed in Europe. So it's global, even with a small entity, 3 or 4 people doing a business. And that is the environment coming to be here, and you need to be well aware of that. We can, of course, we will try to have that, but in order to sustain the success, I think you need to think that flexibility, that environment also. And one of the things we have been doing in direct relation to the theme for today is what we call that was a FDA mandate on what we call FMEA. It's failure mode and error analysis. We started with that. That was mandated in 1997 US FDA regulations. Failure mode and error analysis for each single simple project. After that, it's not a post-mortem. We discuss all the things happened and document everything. But after some time, I decided I want to change the name to SFA because we want to sustain the practices we followed, which were successful. So I changed the word to SFA, Success and Failure Analysis. And every small project had a FMEA or SFA after the project's completed. So probably that also need to be here. You need to consider that aspect also. With these words, I again congratulate our own minister, and you